So here we have the city map painting that we did last week, and this week we want to turn it into a nighttime scene. So the way we're going to do this is first get all of the colors of all of our buildings into a nighttime color range, and then we're going to go in and add lights throughout it. Once we get our primary lights in there, interior building lights, and these background lights, we'll go through and add atmospheric lighting, interactive lighting, and little detail lights like bridge lights and turning on these street lights. So the first thing I'm going to do is get a sky. The sky controls the colors of your painting, so it's usually a good idea to start with a good sky. For this, I found a great sky right here. I love the subtle clouds and the nice gradient that it's getting. And on top of that, I also have a little nighttime reference that I found. It's low res, but I really like the colors. And the city lights are a little too monochromatic and blue, but I like the atmosphere, the fog, the kind of gray sky, the silhouetted buildings kind of dissipating into the sky. So those are the things I'm going to take away from this and try to incorporate into our painting. So I'm going to drop our new sky in here, hide some of these buildings, and what I want to do is get it lined up with our horizon. Like that. And then I'm going to go and do color corrections to get it closer to this sort of foggy, desaturated sky. I'm going to leave a little more color in than this reference has, but it'll be close. And if you don't want to get thrown off by the mountains or the colors that are happening down beneath, a lot of the times I'll just make a rectangle and fill it with black so that I can just focus on the sky and not the landscape in the plate. So I think something like that is fine for now, for us to start with. When I've lifted the dark sky a lot, you can see a lot of artifacts in this plate, and also too many stars. And I want to kind of haze it out a bit. So I'm just going to create a new layer and just blur it. Do a Gaussian blur. And then I can use our blending options and bring back some of that starlight. And I'll just lower the opacity of this so you can see the effect. Another thing is if you're getting a lot of banding, now you can go back and add finer detail noise. Filter, noise, add noise. And we'll just tone it down a bit. Cool. So now you can see that we had that kind of ugly artifacting and chatter. Now we have something, it's a little noisy, but it still feels a lot higher res. Just naming these layers, keep it organized. I'm actually going to make this just a little darker. I'll make it a little darker up top, and then I'll add an uplight, kind of the glow from the city. And again, if you're getting that banding from your gradients, especially when you're working with these dark tones, you could just add, I'm just hitting Control F to add noise to that, redoing the last filter. Cool. Put that in a group, color correct it, and delete our old sky. Now, when we did the initial painting, we started by setting the color in the midground and then working our way back and front from there. And I'm going to do the same thing here, just to make sure I get a nice city lighting. So I'm going to take down our highlights, make it a little darker overall. And get some of those cool tones in here. Reduce the saturation as well. And I'm looking at how these buildings in our reference are playing out. Yeah, it's something like this, but we have too harsh of a highlight on this side, and we're not going for direct sunlight hitting these buildings anymore. We're going to add lights coming from windows and an uplight from down below. So I want to tone down all the lights and the light sources in these buildings. Luckily, we already have that masked out, so I can just copy that mask over and then just tone down this side. And it's okay to leave a little bit of form because we don't want to flatten out all of our buildings. We just don't want it to be as harsh of a highlight. So I'm going to name these layers night layers. And I'm going to color code these too, so that when I'm flipping through layers, I know that these are the three that are turning it into a nighttime building. Last thing I'm going to do is create a soft light layer on this highlight side, just because it's getting light as it gets lighter as it gets higher. This might actually be, yeah, no, we do need to adjust this. So I'm just going to use soft light and black and just tone that down. The way our city lighting is going to be, it should get lighter as we get lower in the building now. So now that we have this, we've already gone when we were doing the daytime painting, We've already gone and color corrected all of our elements to be in the same range. So just a couple nighttime adjustments, we should be able to copy and paste those to our different layers and have it sit in where it's supposed to. And then we might have to go back in and make little adjustments here and there, but it'll give us a really good starting point across all of our layers. So we have the start, but we do need to tone down our highlights and get rid of some atmosphere, little flares happening here. So we can just go through these pretty quickly and see, if we were doing, if we were adding light somewhere, and if not, we can use our old masks to tone down those sides. A little too much red in these highlights, so I'm definitely going to have to go through and take the red out. And see how much this speeds up that we have our levels adjustments named, because we also know where our masks are for our highlights and shadows. Whatever. A lot of the times I spend, I'm just like quickly naming things, and I make a lot of typos. But from a distance, you see what the name is, and you understand. It's nice that when you are starting with the painting that you've already done, or a singular image, and turning it into nighttime, all the colors are already there, so you don't have to color correct each element by hand. You can just get so much out of a single color correction. Once you find your look for your buildings and the colors that you want it to be, you can just spread that throughout. Some of these I didn't name, should have. But I can go back now. Yeah, I can take down these Atmo layers or even just lower the opacity a bit. And take these flares out. Cool. So now that quickly we have our whole midground color corrected and done. And we're just gonna copy that all the way up and down. What I do wanna show you is when we get to the far background. So let me quickly get these background elements blocked in terms of color. This stuff is all the same process, so I'm gonna speed through it just because I do wanna get to the deep background because that's a bit different. I'll clean this stuff up later. So as we get further back, right now, the way we have our atmosphere baked in and our color corrections, our buildings are getting brighter because they're adjusting to a bright sky and a bright atmosphere that they're dissipating into. But if you look at our nighttime reference, they become more like silhouettes, and we actually want our buildings to take on our nighttime sky color now, which is actually darker. So we want our city to fade off into darkness, and that'll also give us a nice opportunity to add little lights back there to create a larger sense of scale without seeing so many details in the buildings. So as we go further back, I'm just gonna keep getting darker and darker with the buildings. And the light direction becomes less apparent. And as you adjust these background buildings, you might want to go to the midground buildings again and create nicer transitions back and forth. It's all a push and pull. See how little range we're getting into? The highlights are almost completely gone. They're almost touching the shadows. And then we're just pulling our midtones. And this might look really flat at first, but we're going to be adding in later on atmospheric lighting to separate these buildings out and give it depth where we might be losing depth right now. Then as we get into the deep background, I'm going to go and kill our atmosphere and our highlights and all the flares and all that stuff that we added. Keeping it in the same, keeping the color correction we did to match the rest of the city. But then I'm just going to go down and just crunch it almost to the point where all the details are gone. And they become almost like silhouettes. And then just put a little bit of those midtones up so you see a little bit of that detail. But it should mostly be fading. And if we look at our nighttime reference, I know it's low res, but there's just not a lot of detail anyways. Even if this was high res, you wouldn't be able to see a lot of the details in these buildings other than the lights. The lights are really where all your detail is coming from. And I'm going to bring in some of these sky colors. Now the tops of the buildings are going to be a lot darker, so I'm going to create a levels adjustment and then just have a gradient of what it affects. And I'm going to take these and just copy them right into that second deep background layer. And as you do this, again, you might want to go to the background and go, okay, now these buildings need to be a little darker to have an easier fall off. And maybe these highlights are too strong now. And then just kind of work our way back up. Having more and more information inform revealing as we get closer to the camera. And then just adjusting these to make a nice transition. So it's taking down the highlights so you don't have a strong light source, but then upping the midtones so that you have an ambient light. That's basically what we're doing across this whole thing. And you can see how many layers, especially when you start to, you have everything color corrected for one lighting scenario and then you do a separate one. And that's why it's so important to have groups. And one of the things I didn't do, which really should be a lot earlier on, is color correct the plate to match the sky. And usually I'll actually do this when I set my master building in the midground. I'll set the plate as well, and this is something in production that a compositor would do, but I like to do it in the painting to give them a reference and also to give me a reference to make sure I can get the rest of the plate in nighttime working with what information we have. So it's going to be pretty dark, but later on we'll paint in interactive lights and light up these street lights. Something like that. So this is pretty rough, and I'm going to spend some time cleaning it up before we add in interiors. I just wanted to give you a quick run through of how to start to get your colors matching in a nighttime scenario.